Look, firstly, I just want to say thanks. I really appreciate that you have all turned up today, and I'm really pleased that you're here for our inaugural Regenerative Agriculture Day in Australia. This is actually one of Australia's bits of leadership for the world. I've made sure I've sent it to all around the world, so hopefully next year we'll have countries all around the world follow Australia's leadership on this. And believe it or not, actually, Australia, we are one of the great leaders in regenerative agriculture. People around the world are looking across at us. But saying that too, this is a global movement, and a global movement that is resonating. Those of us that formed Regeneration International have actually been surprised, overwhelmed by the response we're getting, the interest and uptake. When we set up Regeneration International, the idea was just to set up a platform, an umbrella, that we could bring in farmers from all around the world. What is really important for us here is not to be prescriptive or have an exclusive organisation, but to be a welcoming umbrella that looks at lots of different types of agriculture that we would call regenerative. So it's not one size fits all. We want it to be available to all farmers, with the idea is that all farmers can look at the information that we have based on science, but also for us as farmers based on what we know is good proven practice on the ground, and for farmers to look at these as tools and pick up those that they feel will work best for their system. So even though some of us, for instance, come from the organic sector, we're not here to have certification or put standards or anything like that. Others have come from all different sectors. This is about bringing farmers together and looking at what we as farmers can look to add to our systems to make our farms more resilient, more productive, and also, equally important, lower our production costs so we are financially viable, because farming is getting harder and harder and harder. I want to start today with really what is for me is the basis of the key to good regenerative farming. And it was brought home to me years ago. It's actually at a field day I was hosting. We had one of our local Department of Primary Industry officers there and asked me a question. He said, as farmers, what are we really doing? What is the most important thing that we're doing? And his answer to that was, we are growing leaves. Okay. And the reason why is because leaves photosynthesize. They capture solar energy, and through that, bring water and carbon dioxide, they do the most important biological reaction on the planet. They make glucose, and glucose is the basic molecule of life. And this is really what I want to use as the basis of my talk today, to explain how, by maximising the capture of sunlight through photosynthesis, through leaf area, how we can maximise our productivity and lower our production costs. To explain this reaction with glucose, It is our primary energy source. Virtually every living cell, every living organism uses glucose for energy. There are exceptions. If they don't use glucose, they actually use things like ketones, which are fats, which are made from glucose. Glucose is a basic sugar, and also in leaves, leaves don't just make glucose, they also synthesize a whole range of other compounds. So for instance, they'll combine glucose together in various ways to make all these other sugars we know, like fructose, fruit sugar, lactose, milk sugar, maltose, galactose. You can go on and on and on with all the different types of sugars. And sugars are primarily used as energy sources. The other way glucose is used is put together in long chains to make another sugar called cellulose. Lose is actually the scientific word for sugar. Cellulose is wood, is stems. Paper is made from cellulose. It's like, this is actually long chains of glucose that are joined together, and it's what gives trees and plants their stability. This is also a very important food source. Lots of microorganisms have an enzyme called cellulase, and they can use cellulase to break this down to glucose in water. And a very good example of that are termites. Termites will have have microorganisms in their gut that break this down, and as a result, termites can live in some of the most arid areas on the planet. They don't need to have water because they get the water and the sugar from this. The rumen in cattle, that's exactly what the microorganisms are doing. We can eat as much grass as we want, we'll fill our stomachs, but we're not going to live for a very long time because we cannot eat cellulose. But cattle and many ruminants can, because the microorganisms have cellulase, and they can turn this into glucose, into sugar. The other thing that plants can do, but also most living organisms can do, we can modify these sugars and change them just slightly and turn them into carbohydrates, which are flour, potatoes, cassava, all the starches that we eat as a basic commodity. We can change that, or plants and animals can modify that just slightly, and you turn a carbohydrate into a hydrocarbon, which are fats, oils. So basically what our civilization is running on now are fossilized hydrocarbons, fossilized photosynthesis from hundreds of millions of years ago. But that all came from solar energy via living organisms. The other really important thing that all of us can do is take these hydrocarbons and carbohydrates, add nitrogen, in some cases sulfur, and turn them into amino acids and peptides. These make our DNA, our proteins, our saliva, and so on and so on. But all of these compounds of life come from one basic molecule, glucose. And glucose comes from water and carbon dioxide through the action of sunlight in the leaves of plants. Without leaves, without photosynthesis, life on this planet would not exist. And I think that's a really important thing to get across. So what I want to get across too is that essentially these molecules that drive life, the more we can produce in our farming system, the more productivity we can have. So what we want to do is increase our capture of sunlight through increasing our leaf areas. What I need to get across to, which is really important, when we look at a plant, any plant, 95, in most cases, 98% of the biomass we see of these plants here are composed of water, oxygen, and carbon. But actually, once again, carbon dioxide and water through sunlight. Only at most 5% of the biomass of a plant comes from the soil, the minerals. That 5% is crucially important, don't get me wrong. We need to get that, we need to get the nutrients right. But what I find is amazing in most of our horticultural and most of our text on agronomy, there is zero mention of the 95 to 98%. Zero. And yet let's start rethinking and saying, hey, hang on, shouldn't we actually be looking at how we can officially manage the vast majority of our biomass? Not ignoring it. If we want to increase productivity, why are we ignoring the most fundamental part of, what we're doing? And getting back to what we're doing as farmers, if we are growing row crops or horticulture or whatever, we're growing plants and we're directly harvesting what those plants produce. That could be grains, that could be fruits, that could be vegetables. If we're growing animals, we're still doing the same thing, we're indirectly harvesting. But it gets down to the more productivity we can get from the plants, the more we produce, the more we can sell. With animals, the better the pasture, the more pasture we have, the more biomass, the more animal stock we can run per hectare. It's not rocket science. And yet, it's the basis of getting that biomass is not mentioned in most agronomy texts. So the other thing that I need to get across is this, is that when we are looking at a plant, if you look at these trees here, and we'll see the green area there, we have a rule of thumb that what we see on top, it's largely the same below. So what you see the biomass of that, we know that the root mass, the amount of biomass in the soil is much the same. Now there are exceptions. There are some plants that have much bigger root masses than leaves and vice versa, but that's a good enough rule of thumb. But the third rule of thumb, the next rule of thumb, is in many ways even more important. Over the growth of that plant, at least a third of all the carbon that is fixed, the glucose and glucose products, are shed by the roots into the soil. So I've just got the image up there if people can see it, that what we see there is you've got solar energy combined with carbon dioxide and water creates glucose, and through photosynthesis. And those leaves also synthesize all the other carbon compounds, which are the sugars, which are the fats, which are the carbohydrates, which are also the proteins, the DNA. And as the roots grow, they secrete around 33% of that. Now, once again, that's a rule of thumb. Some do up to 60%, some do down to 20%, different species. But just to say around 30% is a good enough rule of thumb to get the concept. So what we're seeing on top there, just imagine the same amount again is going into the soils, all these compounds, and what they are doing is feeding the soil food web, the carbon gift. And it's a really important concept to get across, is that as these roots secrete all these carbon compounds, they are feeding soil microbes. We have a word for that now. It's had it for a while, called the Rhizosphere. The most biodiverse area in the world on the planet is the area that surrounds roots, where a teaspoon of that will hold more species than all the species of trees in Australia. To put things into perspective, actually, more species of trees than are in the Amazon. It is so diverse. So, what I want to talk now is how we can use this to build soil. The Rhizosphere, or the soil biology, the soil microbiome is another word. The soil food web. There's lots of different words that you'll hear used. They're largely interchangeable. The word now we're starting to hear more and more is this concept of the microbiome. We have our own microbiome in our stomach. We have, it in the soil. It's the word now that is starting to be used in most of the literature, because we're actually starting to understand. Now, what did I do there? We're starting to understand how important health at every level, from soil health to our health, is mitigated or mediated by these microbes. We're going from the fact that all microbes are bad and we have to poison them and kill them, to, hang on, the vast majority are beneficial, and if we can manage them properly, we can use them to control the few microbes that are pathogenic that cause diseases in us and in plants. But most importantly, if we manage them properly, we can improve soil health and human health and animal health. This now is becoming mainstream science. We've got a long way to go, because it's something, people like myself who have been involved in this in the 70s, we were laughed at. We were regarded as nutcases. But for me, that sort of changed in 2014. For me, I was invited to launch the International Year of Soil Health in 2015 in the United Nations General Assembly in New York. That's a big change for someone who is regarded as a bit of a nutter to someone now who is speaking to all the countries of the world, launching an event. And then in 2015, the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization held its first ever international conference on soil health. 2015, 4 years ago. That's how new this is now. And I always remember walking down to the building. There's a big banner down from going down 5 floors, saying healthy soil, healthy food, healthy people. That was our mantra 40 years ago, and we were laughed at. And for me, I was thinking, this is a game changer. Here we are now, we've got the United Nations Food and Agriculture putting this up. And I'm in this event, the first ever scientific conference of it, as one of the speakers. You know, this is the change now, that this is credible, but it's still in its infancy. Most trained agronomists around the world, including Australia, know nothing. And I will say know nothing, because when they went to university, or they went to TAFE, or whatever it was, this was not in the course. So let's now start talking about how we can use this as farmers and start looking at some of the science on it. Because what I want to talk about is how to grow more, maximize the use of leaf area to improve the productivity. We've actually been taught the opposite in agronomy. Anything that is not our cash crop is a weed and it reduces production. So we've got to plough it out, we've got to spray it out, whatever. But if you've got anything else in the ground that is not what you're growing, you're losing production. And in part it's right. But I'm going to get back to that 95 to 98%. It's probably 2% right, 98% wrong. It's how you do it. So let's start looking at how, and let's start looking at examples. So I've started with this picture here to show you the basis of how we manage plants for our system. This is a perennial grass. Now, if you look at where the leaves are long, you'll see the root mass. You see, as we cut the leaves, the roots diminish. And the reason why is this: everybody thinks plants feed through their roots. They get water through their roots, and they get around 2% of their nutrients. But plants actually feed through their leaves. Get back to photosynthesis. 98% of most plants comes from photosynthesis, glucose, carbon dioxide and water. And that's what feeds the rest of the plant. You know, for instance, when they make proteins, that still gets made in the leaf. They have another part that uses the energy to add nitrogen and sulfur to the glucose and form amino acids, carbohydrates, the starches that we eat, the fats. Most of that occurs in the leaves and due to solar energy. Now, when we cut the leaves, it's a bit like giving a stomach banding operation. Suddenly there is not enough nutrients to feed the rest of the plant. So if we cut, let's go to the extreme example in this where the leaves are cut right back, there's hardly any roots. Now if we cut the leaves totally, the plant has two options. You can say, I'll try and feed everything but I haven't got enough, so I'll let everything die, or get rid of the roots I can't feed and look after those that I can feed, and then we'll start to regrow and add more roots. The best way to explain this is ring barking, how ring barking works. You know, if you cut a plant off, in most cases, depending on how you do it, the plant will coppice. It'll shoot back up again because it's still got some energy, it will grow. And as it grows, it'll grow more roots and grow. If you ring bark, what you're doing is you're stopping the sap, the nutrients that the leaves are doing, from feeding the roots. Plant doesn't know that. It thinks it's getting the water up, it's photosynthesizing, but it's not getting anything down to the roots. Eventually the roots die and the plant dies. That's why ring barking will kill trees in many ways that cutting won't, or kill plants. And so I want to get that across with plants, that when we cut them or when we graze them, they shed their roots to balance. And so that is a really important management strategy when we're looking about how do we add this to our cropping system. So if we look at this picture here, and what I want to get across is what the taller plants, imagine that's our cash crop. The two things that we need for that 98%, sunlight for solar energy and water. So if our crop has got access to the sunlight before and the word I'm going to use now instead of the weed is the cover crop. If our cash crop is getting the sunlight first, it's taller, okay, it is now not being out-competed because that's what we want. We want to capture all the sunlight. Similarly, if it's taller, its roots are deeper. So it's going to get access to the water first as well. So the key in many cases in managing isn't, spraying out or ploughing out, but is keeping our cash crop, allowing our cash crop to be taller than our cover crop. Using this in such a way too that we can look at how we can build soil carbon. So I want to show you, this is my place. I grow tropical fruits. I know I post a lot of flowers on Facebook, but actually I don't make money out of selling the flowers. I make money out of selling fruit. And I live in an area that can get pretty damp. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, up our way, we've had a bit of water. One day we got 662 millimetres in the day. It was a bit damp. And one of the things I do, I'm regarded as the messiest farmer because when you start getting that sort of rain, I suppose I grew up in acres and inches. I still like the word inches. And you start getting a couple of inches an hour falling, that's very destructive on your soil. So I like to have, in this time of year in our monsoon season, have a very high, what I'll call cover crop, what my neighbours will call weeds. And that breaks the first impact of these heavy drops and it percolates down and it slows down the water flow and acts as a silt trap. But the other one for me, which is equally important, is maximising my photosynthesis. So if you have a look, for those you can see the picture there, you can just see my tractor sort of sticking through. That's 3 metres tall with some of our perennial grasses and perennial legumes. It's a massive amount of biomass, and I'll let it grow all through this time of year, and depending on when our main monsoon stops, it's usually April, May sometime, I get out then and I slash it down, ready for the dry season. So in my case then, just imagine, I just wanted to, when I showed you the pictures before, just imagine all that biomass, how tall it is. It's taller than me and my tractor. I slash that down, let it rot down. But think about also the amount of root area I've got there, the amount of carbon I'm fixing, and also, in this case, nitrogen. So when I took over my farm, I had less than 1% organic matter. I actually had a pH of 4.5. It was pretty poor. I remember when this is actually my third farm. I remember when I bought it and I was having a beer at my neighbour's one night, and the neighbour says, I don't know what sort of lychee trees you've got there, but I've never seen a crop on them. And I went, yikes. What have I bought? But anyway, I just took this picture because I actually had no idea this is what I'd done. I had less than 1% organic matter. The soil was so hard. I remember the first time I planted trees, I had to use a crowbar. I couldn't even use a shovel or a mattock to dig holes. It was so tight and compacted. And this was actually, I cut this away because I was building a new packing shed, and I suddenly realised what I'd done. This was about 2 feet deep, and I realised I'd taken my soil organic matter up. The average is 6%. In some places there it's 9%. And what the soil tests show in terms of how I've increased all the nutrients without actually spending all that money on it. The biology is really important in bringing it in. If you have a look in the middle of there, you'll see one of the legumes I use, and you'll see the root of, the root coming down. You see how the actual root itself is deepening the soil, and as it grows, you can see the carbon around it. It's exudates. It's the roots. They're really important for building soil, but very importantly, the microorganisms around the roots that do it. This is another example in Australia in Gulgong, and probably a lot of people know this is coal sice, but I want to show you this is something that technically should be impossible in standard agronomy. No way that you can grow a crop of a viable grain crop in a pasture without ploughing out, without fertilising, so on, so on, so on. Cole did this out of sheer desperation. His farm was about to go bankrupt. He and his brother had a night of liquid inspiration, as a lot of Australian farmers do at times when we need to do a bit of problem solving. And he just said, what would happen if you just ploughed a few, in a few oats into the pastures, just so he's got a bit of extra feed for his sheep. In the end, I haven't got time to really go into it in big detail, but what is really important here is that the yields he gets in this system of cropping into perennial pasture are the same as his neighbours, without all the diesel costs for ploughing out, without all the costs for fertilizers and herbicides. What is really, and when the head has gone off, what has he got under there? He's got pasture and put his sheep straight back on. He gets 2 crops. This took him from the bank almost owning him to he's doing very nicely, thank you. But it's the same principle I want to get across. By using holistic grazing and grazing down that perennial pasture, I know other people will use mulches over it. There's lots of different ways to do it. Get it down low, time it right so that your cash crop can grow and get ahead, so the cash crop is getting the sunlight, the roots are down getting the water, you can get a good crop. This is work that Dr. Christine Jones has done, and I really recommend at a future event you get Christine here. She is one of the most brilliant agronomists in Australia for this and how to do it. Her research, and she's doing all around the world, is incredible. But in the beginning, because like most Australian soils, it was low in phosphorus. That's all he did. He put a bit of super on. But have a look at the increase in nutrients, despite the fact he's been taking off crops of grains and running sheep. He has increased his soil fertility dramatically. In standard agronomy, that should be impossible. But it's not. I'm giving this as an example here, but we know of lots of examples here. That is because of soil biology. And I want to get it across now that with the right system, plants in the right way of growing, by using photosynthesis and solar energy to feed the soil microbes that build soil, the more we can feed them, the more soil we can build, we improve fertility. Plants will increase fertility, not decrease them with the right system. That doesn't mean that there won't be times where you'll have to correct deficiencies or put nutrients in. In my own farm, I live in a very high rainfall area, we forever need boron. I can't keep it up because it leaches out. There's certain things you'll find that you will need, but the amount you need goes from tons to kilos per year. You don't have to take a mortgage out to get them, or bank overdraft. So, I'll go into a bit more detail about building soil health. I just want to touch on a few other, on building soil fertility, I just want to touch on a few other really important things like pests and diseases with the same thing. Soil health is the key to this. It is really important. Most pests and diseases are opportunistic. Now, I say most, not all. And there are times too, it doesn't matter how good your system is, we get plagues, we get things, no ecological system, no natural system is perfect. And I think so you need to have plan Bs and backups. But most of the time we can prevent them, and reaching for the spray bottle is not tool number one, it's not plan A, it's the tool of last resort that we don't have to use that often. And I think that is the really important thing to get across here. So, I want to show you something. This is an example in Ethiopia of wheat getting rust. And everybody says, oh, rust is caused when you get wet years. We've got two fields here. One has been fertilised by agronomists using best practice chemical fertilisers. The other has been grown using compost, building up soil organic matter. And this is the same soil, the same wheat variety, the same weather condition, technically the same level of rust spore in the environment. There's nothing separating them. It's just two different treatments. And you can see the difference in them. So the one that was done by best practice conventional agronomy, they had to spray it with fungicides. Without it, they would have had complete crop loss. They got 1.6 tonnes to the hectare here. The ones that were grown with compost, they didn't have to spray. They got 6.5 tonnes to the hectare. This is my own farm. I grow pawpaws, papayas. I grow a lot of different tropical fruits. Now, this particular crop is, we have one of Australia's, and in fact one of the world's worst pests, fruit spotting bug. And for a long time, Australia was this second last country in the world to actually ban a chemical called endosulfan. And it was kept because all the growers in our area said, without endosulfan, we cannot control this pest, we're ruined. That's always the reason why we don't ban pesticides. So if without it, we've got no control. And so while the rest of the world banned this chemical because of the serious birth defects and issues, particularly in the farming communities, but also the consumers who ate it, Australia kept it on because to control this pest. I just want to show you, if you have a look at this papaya, you can see where it sucks. This thing actually sucks where the new leaves and flowers are coming out and damages, it'll actually kill the plant. You can see the damage. In this case, instead of spraying, I corrected it by putting on compost, making sure I had my water levels right, and also correcting any deficiencies. The 5% or 2% is still important. In my case, It's actually making sure my calcium and boron levels are good, and it goes away. What is really interesting here is that this is a pest that it's virtually impossible to get, for birds to get. What I noticed is that when I fix up the nutrition, the plants have their own defense systems, and this is something we're learning more and more about. It's something which I'm going to be writing a lot more on how this works, but I can actually pick this pest off with my fingers once. It's still on it, hasn't killed it, but it's not feeding. Once I've fixed up the nutrition, which means that birds and predators can now get this pest. It's too slow to escape them. The other one I want to talk, so that's one, soil health. Getting that is really important, but let's also look at other ways of we can deal with pests and diseases by modifying the ecology and getting back to this whole idea of using solar energy, using photosynthesis for our ecosystem services. So the concept here that we've been introducing is called eco-function intensification. Instead of intensifying the system by adding more chemicals and pesticides, what we do is look at this concept of what we call functional biodiversity. We bring in plants or animals that have a function that helps our cropping system. By bringing in plants and we add them in, we're actually now using solar energy, essentially that our crop isn't using, that's falling on the ground, to power these ecosystem services. So firstly, I just want to, if we want to talk about soil health and in terms of what the biology can do for this, is just a little chart giving you an idea of the amount of microbes or biology in the soil. It's in pounds per acres. A lot of us grew up with that, so we understand it. For those that don't, a pound per acre is much the same as a kilo per hectare, which is nice. So in other words, 2,600 pounds an acre is 2,600 kilograms a hectare of bacteria, and so on and so on. I just wanted to put that there to show you the extent of it, but I just want to also show you the value of, by getting a soil health, how we can actually bring in a whole range of microorganisms that can control pests and diseases. So once again, so getting back to this idea of all this biology, that by increasing our leaf area, increasing our root area, and the amount, in other words, the more leaf area we've got, the more sunlight we capture, the more carbon compounds we make, the more that gets excreted into the soil to feed the soil biology, the soil microbiome. It's pretty basic 101 stuff. So the more we can do it, the more we can increase it, and then we can get all these ecosystem services which we find will protect our plants from different diseases. And we know, for instance, protozoas will eat bacterial wilt. We know about fungi that will eat nematodes and other ones that actually most nematodes actually eat nematodes. You put a nematicide in, you're actually killing all the good nematodes and locking yourself into, it seems the bad nematodes are always the ones that are the most, what's the word? The one most resistant to pesticides and fungicides. The other one, we know that many of the bacteria produce natural antibiotics in the soil. That's where the antibiotics came from. We know that many of the fungi will protect our plants. So here's an example, for instance, of a fungi that actually predates and eats nematodes. You can actually buy some of these now. They are available, but the fact is, if you get your soil right, you don't need to buy them. If you do things like, essentially what Nutrisoil is doing here, and inoculate your soil with broad spectrum microorganisms that you get from worm casts, you're generally getting all of these things for free and more than buying the specific products. So, the other one I want to talk about too, that's below the ground. Above the ground, we can also bring in plants that will give us ecosystem services, and one of the most important are the concept of insectaries. Is what I actually use in my farm. I used to have to spray organic compounds, organically allowed pesticides. I lent my sprayer to a neighbour 10 years ago and haven't bothered to get it back. But I used to export all around the world. I used to export to Japan, for instance, perfect fruit, and without having to spray, because I finally got these eco-functional intensification right. And the particular one are insectaries. And what we have, for all our insect pests, they're natural enemies. Our beneficial insects is the other word. And most of them, it's their larval stage that it attacks the pest. But the adult stage, they need to have nectar and pollen. Essentially, these are used as what we call parahormones. Without it, they cannot produce their sex hormones, and they cannot reach sexual maturity, and they cannot make babies. So if you have a look at the pictures here, you'll see the pictures of some of the parasitic wasps, for instance. They lay their eggs on a caterpillar or inside, and the eggs will go inside, live inside, and then eat it out and then burst out. It's actually where Alien came from in the film. It's based on this parasitic wasp. The Alien is actually a big wasp, and they have the stage where they live inside the caterpillar and then they bust out. So if you're a caterpillar, it's not particularly nice. But on the other hand, if you're a plant being eaten by caterpillars, it is particularly nice. But unlike the predator and Alien, a lot of these animals, when they mature now, see the errors of their way and decide to become vegans. And that's when they need pollen and nectar. Not all of them, but pollen and nectar is essential for their reproductive phase. So you'll get a lot of people, for instance, will buy various predatory insects, like the wasps and stuff, and let them go in their farms, but they have to always buy them because these things can never reproduce because the farms don't have the host plants. They can never make the next generation, so they're locked into buying it. What the research shows that if we can redesign our farming systems, so we're using the sunlight that our cash crop isn't used to grow these host plants, put them into the system, we can now use that solar energy to give us pest control. This is an example underneath my trees and my orchard that I do. I have actually up to 30 different species now, and because like all things, the greater the biodiversity you can put in of these plants, the greater biodiversity you will get of beneficial insects that control your pests. The more robust the system will be. So I have that now. I like it. I love the look. A lot of neighbours think I'm very messy because I should have nice brown bare areas of dirt by spraying Roundup. instead of letting all these weeds go feral through my place. That's, on the other hand, I don't have to spray. These are other examples. You can do it on any scale. So in some cropping systems, they'll actually make these hedgerows of insectary systems. One of them there I'll show you is actually in Nebraska. These blocks are a square mile. They've just done the perimeter planting, and that seems to work. Generally speaking, having strips down through the cropping system works best. There's a whole range of ways. You can use them as windbreaks. Some are permanent. Some now we're looking at how you can just, at planting, just also every, say 40, 50, 60 metres, just have a little strip of flowers you just put down and grows at the same time, and that can give you pest control. If we're in the United States, for instance, now, you can get this whole books, in fact, the Department of Agriculture in California, for instance, has a whole calendar, so you can actually look at redesigning your property, putting in these insectary plants that are flowering all year round for pest control. In Australia, we're not even close to it yet. But simple things you can do. This is also work from California. In what we call strip mowing. Instead of mowing the whole place in one go, you leave refuges. By doing that, you can dramatically increase the amount of beneficials. It's what I do on my farm. Once again, I'm seen as messy because I've left, instead of going out with a tractor and slasher and having my place looking really neat, I've left all these unkempt little areas like this. But the advantage of this is that I'm actually spending less time on the tractor. I've left one bit as, you can actually see it's in 3 stages. So I will leave one area. When I decide, and I will mow that area, which is the refuge eventually, you can see there's other areas that will come up to replace it. So I've always got a refuge, for these beneficials. You start rethinking, these people are our friends, they're out there working for me, that's why I don't have to spray. I want to look after them. So the last thing I want to do is go and rip down their houses. The other thing is, basically, it's a bit like humans. We can fit a lot more people in the CBD of Melbourne or Sydney because we vertically stack them in high rises than we can in Western Queensland. And it's the same with these refuges. The higher you can have it, the more you can have. And work done in California is really interesting where if you do it properly, they're saying if you turn around and went to one of the places that sells these insects, the equivalent to buy them is about $260,000 an acre per year. That's to put it into perspective if you can redesign your system. Here's some of the examples of, where all farms, we have these sort of areas that we can't really crop. They're little gullies, they're little stuff that are always sort of a weed area, when people won't have to go out and spray them, creek banks, whatever, little gullies. Instead, start modifying them, redesigning them, and using these areas by putting in plants that can control our pests. And this is what's being done all around the world with hedges and with multiple species. In many cases, this is controlled by also cutting and harvesting and using for compost, for worm farms. For a lot of them actually, in these countries, actually will use them to make biogas, and then the slurry from the biogas, they vermicompost and put that out. It's a very efficient way of turning that, managing that and turning it into compost for soil health. I took this picture. This is my farm again. One of the crops I grow, orangutans. I actually sell a lot of this to Japan. I don't know if any of you have exported to Japan, but they pay good money, but they're the fussiest customers in the world. Things have got to be 150% perfect, even to the way we tape the box. They'll look at that, because if it's not taped properly, that shows we haven't taken care. It shows our attitude. So, in my case, I'd have to make sure that all my staff are taping it properly. If one box isn't taped properly, I'll get it repacked. It's worth it to me. If I send a whole shipment and one box is not perfect, and it's the same with the fruit. I go in there and I look and I see one bit of fruit that's not absolutely perfect. I haven't taken care. They downgrade everything. But for a long time, I did very, very well exporting to Japan. 100% perfect fruit, organic, never sprayed. And so I took this is just at the back of my packing shed, and I was just walking past, and it just exemplifies everything I'm talking about here. It exemplifies everything about what my neighbours say about me. I've got the messiest trees, I'm letting all the weeds grow up them. On the other hand, if you have a look at what is growing up there, which is it's a climbing legume, you can see sunlight on it. I wanted to do that because that's the sunlight that my cash crop, the rambutans, aren't using. Instead of wasting it now, I'm maximising solar energy. So it is photosynthesizing. It is giving me soil carbon. It's a legume. I'm getting free nitrogen. So it's adding nutrients instead of competing with them. I think that's really important to get across. It's not competing for sunlight with my crop. My crop is higher. It gives me green manure. The flowers attract beneficial insects. And the other thing I want to get across is one of the things we hear all the time, you have to get the weeds out to conserve water. And that is, once again, one of these things that's 98% wrong. The fact is, if you look at my place where I live in a place that, today it's 35, and we're hot all year round with enormous evaporation rates. Quite often, say 14 millimetres a day if we've got the pans out day after day. By having this green area we call living mulch, you can go underneath my trees and it's moist. It stays there. If you go to where there's bare soil, it's baked. Now, people say, the plants are using moisture. Yes, they are, but you lose more on bare soil because of capillary action. That soil heats up and it's like a wick. It draws the water up and it evaporates. By having a living mulch, you can keep it cool and you slow down. The other thing that we're starting to really understand too is the nature of green plants as cloud strippers. They actually strip out water from humidity. Even when you think it's really dry, there's still some humidity in the air. And at night time now, we're starting to understand it, particularly in arid areas. Now they're realizing so much of the soil moisture the plants themselves strip out at night time. You can actually go and measure in the morning and you'll see that there's been an increase in water. If you take those plants out, instead of conserving the water, you're losing water. You're no longer getting the water in. I'm saying that, look, in all these sort of systems, you still have to think about what are the right species and the right mix. It's not just it's not just a blanket, one size fits all, but I want to throw in this idea that the one size fits all is also wrong when you say, oh, we've got to get rid of everything as a weed to conserve water. You can actually bring in the right species and improve your water, conserve water. Start looking at which will be the best for your system. Let's start talking about the real point here now and going into more detail about how we build up soils and how we use that to bring in resilience and increase yields. Young plants are composed mostly of cellulose. Remember I started before with glucose. And what is glucose? What is cellulose? It's long chains of glucose put together. And microorganisms break that cellulose back down into glucose. So in many cases, people make green manures of young plants and incorporate them in or break down. And that's actually a good strategy for getting energy, glucose, to feed the soil microbiome, get that biology going, particularly at the start of the season in spring and stuff when the soil's coming back to life. So on that level, it's a good strategy. But if we want to build long-term soil organic matter, you won't do it that way. There's lots of people who will say, oh, look, I've been growing these green manures and ploughing them in, and I haven't increased my soil organic matter. It's because it's all going to cellulose, which is glucose. The soil microbiome uses that glucose and converts it back into carbon dioxide and water. I'll talk a little bit more about how to build the long-term soil organic matter, but what I want to talk about now is the fact, some of the other benefits of soil organic matter and long-term soil organic matter, and thinking of it more than just a fertilizer and more than just something that feeds the soil microbiome. First, I want to say that where we have systems where we increase soil organic matter, these systems have higher yields in climate extremes. This work comes out of the organic sector, and the reason why I can only quote it out of this organic sector is because up till now, the only place where this research has been done scientifically has been the organic sector. It has been largely ignored by mainstream agronomy. But what is really important, we know that, and I want to also put it across, this idea that organic is low yielding. Yes, in some situations, but we know under the right situations it's actually equal and higher yielding, and particularly when it comes to climate extremes, which is to do with droughts and also damaging rains. So let's have a look here at the difference between the same soil, two different treatments. This is a long-term scientific trial done in Switzerland. It's about year 16. One system has been based on, by the way, these are managed by universities, managed under what is considered good agronomic systems. One has been managed under good practice mainstream agronomy, the other one under good practice organic agronomy. And it's aimed at planting. If you look at the organic one, the wheat that's coming up, it's got a little bit of damage, but actually that'll all recover. You look at the conventional, and it's been highly eroded. Where you see that sheen, you know, that's where that's just topsoil going away. But really importantly, you know, that's like that film is hydrophobic. It's like putting plastic over the top of your soil. It stops water going in. You know, you stick your finger down in there, and you get down to an inch, and it'll be bone dry. The water has run off the top. It hasn't infiltrated, whereas in the organic, it has infiltrated. So once again, this is the same thing again, actually from another long-term site, the Rodale Institute, and the same soil, one has been long-term organic, where they build up soil organic matter, the other has been based on good modern agronomy. You put that soil in water, one keeps its integrity, it's actually absorbing water, it's going into it, it's picking it up. The other loses its structure, it erodes, it's not absorbing water, it's actually running off. So let's take this down further into science and look at one of the really important components of soil organic matter, and this is the one I want to talk about, how to build, the critical one for long-term soil organic matter. If you have a look, this is humus. It's under an electron microscope, and you can see it looks like a sponge, because it is. It's actually a polymer, sticky. And because of this sponge shape, it can absorb water and hold up to 30 times its own weight in water. But really importantly here is that it's also very generous with the water. You know, clay soils, for instance, will hold a lot of water. But apart from eucalyptus trees that seem to be able to pull it out, clays are also very, very mean about giving it back to the crop. It's very hard for them to extract that water out. Humus will give the whole lot out. It's really important. It's viable. It's sticky. It's a polymer. So it actually binds the soil together. So when we looked at these soils that held this integrity, that is because the humus works like a soil glue. It's not water soluble. It holds it together and gives it structure. That is really important. It also, I haven't got a lot of time to talk about it, but it increases nutrient storage and availability, so it stops that from leaching out. And once again, it's generous about giving that to the plants. Those nutrients are plant available, like the water, rather than being washed away. It's also very stable. CSIRO work shows that in Australia, the average age of humus in our forests is around 2,000 years. It lasts a long time, although we can, through bad management, can destroy it in a very short time. This is what I really want to get across, because this is just critical for us as farmers to understand. And for those that are soil agronomists, you know that there's a relationship between the amount of water and soil organic matter can hold. Depending on, that is really complex, because you need to take in the soil type, whether it's sandy or clay, things like specific density and all these sorts of things. But for the sake of here, we don't need to confuse things by getting into this infinitely technical, complex detail with soils. This is very good work done by an Australian master's student. He did his master's document on this. So it is robust, but it is good enough and close enough for us to get the picture. You know, most soils I look at in Australia, when I look at soil tests and around the world, are between 0.5% and 1%. That's what my own farm was. I just want to give you a basic demonstration of what we're talking about. And this is really critical at the moment for the type of country we're in. We go through droughts, and droughts are broken by floods. And in many of these floods, most of that water runs off, and you're always surprised how little of it goes in, because it's running off, it's smearing off, because of the soil's lack of ability to hold rain. You know, and really importantly too, because of this 5% less and the way we've lost so much of our topsoils and we've compacted our soils, there's a lot of work showing that something like 98% of rainfall that falls on the soils of Australian farms either evaporates or runs off. 2% is what we capture. Now we need to do a bit better than that if we want to survive. So if we're down like most soils, and it rains, that's what we can capture. If it continues to rain, doesn't matter how much it continues to rain, we will not capture anymore. It'll just run off and flood, usually with our soil, into the rivers. You can have, that's all yours. And on the other hand, if we can increase the soil organic matter, we can significantly increase the amount of water we can capture. And I want to get that across because I think it's really important to understand what is happening to our soils. So most soils, like I said, if it rains, we can capture around 80,000 to 160,000 litres per hectare. If we get that up to around 6%, and the reason why I put 6% there, because I went from less than 1%, from 0.5%, up to 6% in 11 years in my farm. I know examples that have done it better. I want to say this is doable, and you'll get a lot of people saying, no, it can't be done. Yes, it's not. Yes, it can be done, and it's being done all the time, and we have lots of examples. So it's about, instead of saying it can't be done, let's look at ways it can be done and ways that we can look at this information, how we can apply it to our farms. I think it's really important. Get it up to 6%. We're storing around 1 megalitre per hectare. Where are we storing it? We're storing in the root zone. We don't need to build big, have big travelling irrigators and build megalitres of dams and canals. What's more efficient than storing 1 megalitre of water where the roots of our plants are? What can beat that? And it costs us nothing. It's just it's a change in management practice. And this is what I want to get across. This is really important. So this is an example of the same thing here. It's a drought. Same soil. Same variety of corn. There's only one difference: the management practice. And here there's an independent scientific peer review of that study by Professor David Pimentel from Cornell, headed by Professor David Pimentel from Cornell University and other scientists. And on average, they found 30% higher yields. Where this is really important, and other research has shown, is that when we start looking at these systems over time, you don't get the drops of yields, or you can maintain yields in adverse weather conditions. It's very easy to get high yields when all the ducks are lined up. At the moment, Western Australia, after years and years of really tough years, they've got a bumper year, Honestly, the fence posts, they'll get tons of wheat just off the fence posts alone on a year like this year. Everything's flowering, everything's cropping, on those years. But how often do they happen now? In my family, I come from weak sheep people. We were on 14 inches of rain. Now it's less, just below the goiter line, South Australia. We used to work on, 1 every 5 years was what kept us in business, our bumper year. We had 2 average years and 2 years below average, 1 good year, but we did okay. But unfortunately, that 1 in 5 good years, bumper years, it's, we've got to look back to our grandparents to see those now, or whatever. It's just not happening. So the new normal is, how do we keep up productivity with what is happening now? Not hoping for some mythical future where everything's going to be perfect or the ducks line up. And this is where this is so important. So important. So let's talk about how we do it now, get into it. And I want to get back to the real important thing of soil and soil aggregation, what soils are made from. Our agronomy always talks about soils as a mineral. And what mineral fertilizers have got to be put in. Soils are made through weathering. Well, it used to puzzle me. Dig down, 3 or 4 feet or whatever and get down and go, how does weather get down there to make soil? It doesn't. It's not made through physical and chemical weathering. It's made through biological processes. Soils are biologically made, and they're made, I'll get back to it again, they are made by the roots of our plants, secreting the products of photosynthesis to feed the biology. So soils are a biological process. And if we want to speed up that process, we provide them with more food. To me, it's a one-on-one. If I want to produce more cattle per hectare, I produce more feed per hectare. It's not a rocket science question, but it seems to be when I look at agronomy texts. It's just regard our soil microbiome, the soil food web, whatever you want to, regard it as livestock that we are feeding to build our basic fertility for the rest of our crop. It starts from that. And so it's a biological process. It's a complex one. Things like, I just want to show you a picture of a crop. And you've got the roots, but if you have a look all around that's the beneficial fungi that live on the roots that actually will now extend the equivalent of that roots out thousands of more times to bring in nutrients. But working with other bits of biology to make the nutrients available. They do so many things as well, but they open up the soil, a good soil structure for air, water. Air is really important. What we call bed formation, the crumbliness of soils. Feeding the macroorganisms as well, earthworms, beetles are all important. But most importantly, the soil microbiology. So unfortunately, I don't know how well you can see this, but what I wanted to show is something really important, because I hear it all the time. We get leveled at us. You're just mining the soil. You can't be taking all this out without putting in tons and tons of nutrients. Well, when you get a soil test, what you're looking at is what's called plant available. You're not looking at total nutrients. If you look at the total amount of nutrients in the soil, you will find that we have tons and tons and tons. You look here at a clay loam, and this is actually pounds per acres, because it's from the US, but that's kilos per hectare. Average clay loam soil has 6,500 kilograms of nitrogen. Yet we've got to turn around and buy bags of nitrogen to put in. You start looking at phosphorus, and we're looking at a silt loam has around 5 tons of phosphorus, and yet we've got to turn around and buy it, and we go on and on and on. The reason is that these types of nutrients aren't what we call plant available. Nitrogen is an example. The atmosphere, the air we breathe, is actually 78% nitrogen. Plants are bathed in it, and yet nitrogen deficiencies are a really important limitation because it's not in the right form. But in nature, biology can transform it into forms that plants can use. We call it bioavailability. So, nitrogen is an example. The reason why we need good air spaces, not just for oxygen, but for nitrogen, and those microbes will turn that into nitrogen that our plants can use by feeding the biology. Similarly, we know that the organic acids that come from the breakdown of organic material through the microorganisms make things like humic, fulvic, olmic, acetic, citric, all these organic acids help dissolve minerals to make them available. They prevent ions from being locked up. And when I mean locked up, a classic example is phosphorus in Australia. And people put in tons and tons of superphosphate. The vast majority of that, when it goes into Australian soils, because of our high iron levels, gets turned into iron phosphide. Plants can't use. But the answer is I'll keep on putting more in. Eventually you'll have enough of a pool or a reservoir that the plants can use. In the meantime, if we actually do what we call a total P, we find we've got tons and tons of phosphorus. It's just as iron phosphide. But I think what's really important here is that if you've got these organic acids, they actually will bind to the phosphorus and chelate it. For instance, in stores, if you live in some places in Australia where you've got high levels of calcium, it's almost impossible to get iron up, so you buy iron chelate, because otherwise, as soon as you put the iron in the soil, it gets locked up. Chelate is when you put it's a Greek word for claw. You put an organic molecule around it, prevents it from being locked up. But this is what organic acids do. They will allow all these ions that you have, plants will take up, they will stop them from being locked up so they're plant available. And you'll hear these people say, I hear agronomists say, yeah, but plants can only take up minerals in a single ion form. They can't take them around an organic molecule. And then I go, well, if that's the case, how come you guys sell all these chelated trace elements? Because what you're saying is that they shouldn't work. They work, don't they? I go, yeah. And what are they? Aren't they mineral ions that are bonded to an organic molecule? Yeah. And don't the plants take them up? Yeah. So what do you mean that plants can't take them up? What I'm trying to show you here is that, how can I say, you get a lot of things in agronomy text that aren't really robust science. When you start getting deeper into the science and start looking at it, we're starting to understand it. And this is just starting to happen now. Only now. Like I said, 2015, first International Year of the Soil. The world's first Healthy Soils Conference done, international one, ever. We're in our infancy. So the other one, which I want to say too, when we talk about when we talk about weathering rocks, these acids, and there's also enzymes, orphan the minerals out of rocks and make them available. That's how soils are made. As they pull these minerals out of rocks, the rocks start to decompose and fall apart and make soil. That's how, if you dig down, several meters into the soil till you get to bedrock, you see all those rocks that are crumbling. It hasn't been because of the rain and weather up here. It's been because of the biology. And once again, I'll get back to it. The more we can feed the biology, the more work we do the more minerals it can take from our parent material and make available. And so people say, oh, look, you're mining the soil. Well, if we get down to talk about our parent material, how far does that go? That goes to the center of the earth. Think about it. Technically, if we've got the right system, and we've got a system that is supplying us with nutrients that equal or hopefully more than what we are exporting, our system can increase. Like I showed you Cole Sice's farm or my farm, where we've increased our nutrients, even despite the fact of taking high yielding crops off. Okay. I still do soil tests because there are some things, I'll say this now, no system is perfect. There are things that I still need to put on, and so I don't run down. But the basic rule is this: do soil tests, see what your levels are, have a baseline. If you're below it, you need to replenish it because your biology is not doing it. But if you're above it, why are you wasting money putting stuff on? If the biology is replenishing it, and it will. So, getting back to what I'm saying again, which is really important, is I mentioned the word the Rhizosphere, the most biodiverse part of the planet. The word was actually invented in 1901, but it's only recently coming back and used. It's ignored. Sometimes I look back and say, we just wasted 100 years. We knew about this more than 100 years ago and we've ignored it. Where would we be now if we followed up on this research? But that is the area where most life, most microorganisms are. It's around plant roots, and that's fed from the exudates that come through photosynthesis. And they protect the plants from diseases. They help the plant take up nutrients. These exudates, like I said, the enzymes and acids they weather rocks to make the minerals available to plants. And the other one is deep roots build deep soils. That's not rocket science. Get your roots as deep as you can, which means you want to grow things. And once again, use that basic rule. What you see up above is what you've got below. Let your ground covers get as tall as you can afford them to be, so you can get the roots as deep as possible. Each time you deepen it, you deepen your soil. You open it up, makes it easy for the next generation of plants to get deeper still. You don't need to use deep rippers and chisel plows, although in the beginning these things can really help open up to speed up the process. But in the end, roots will do the work. So, let's talk about the long-lasting organic matter, the one that lasts for thousands of years. So, the first one we talked about is the cellulose to feed, the sugars and stuff that will feed the soil food web. It's really important, feed the system. But if we want to build up soil organic matter, the one that will hold the soil together in the long term, the one that will capture the rainfall and store it, we need to build humus. And where humus comes from are the lignins of plants. So in any plant, the cellulose, that's the cell walls, that's why it's called cellulose. Actually, lose means sugar, sugar cell is the best way to put it on plants, and that's what gives them their strength. But plants also have to be able to be flexible and move in the wind. So there's another lot of substances called lignins, and they are like, the best way to say it is carbon fibre flexible reinforcement rods. So plants can, see there a bit of wind, they can move around, they don't snap and they don't break. Gives them strength. Now, that is the component of plants that microorganisms use and they synthesize to build humus, not cellulose. They use cellulose for the glucose, for the food source. Other microbes will assemble the lignins and turn them into humus. Now, lignins we generally get from old coarse plants, trees, or when we start letting our crop residues or our cover crops get old and coarse, that's when they become lignified. So if we want to build long-term organic matter that will build up and increase, we have to allow a certain percentage of our crops and cover crops to lignify. Now, you know, in the end, some people say, oh, you've got to plough it in, whatever. Look, it's up to you in terms of how you want to manage it. I'm actually a great believer in slashing or grazing to bring things down. I'm not anti the plough if it's used in the right direction. I can show lots of research with the right types of ploughing, but I haven't got the time to go into it now, does increase soil organic matter. In fact, some of the systems I showed before where organic matter has been increased, you can obviously see use tillage. Tillage is being demonised now, but shouldn't be. Incorrect tillage should be. There's forms of tillage that really do damage, but I can show you other forms of tillage that can speed up the system, particularly in the beginning. Things like yeoman's ploughs, chisel ploughs, things when we open up subsoils. There's a whole range of things that we can do to speed up the process. So, but the most important one is to just let that residue, let that stubble lignify, and the microorganisms will break that down. And don't forget that most of that is in the soil anyway as roots. The microorganisms will get that lignin and turn that into humus. So every year you'll build up humus. And so when you get, I get challenged all the time by scientists who come to me after and tell me that some of the figures I show. I'll show a few here, but in other places they say it's impossible, can't be done. I say, well, these are all documented, they're all in the peer-reviewed literature. You can't say that. You guys just don't know how to do it. You're going about it the wrong way. It's about time, instead of criticising, you looked and tried to understand and replicate and see why these things are working. I just want to get back to, with the right systems, you can build up soil organic matter and build it up quite quickly. The other really important thing about this sort of soil organic matter is in terms of nutrient storage, so you don't lose it. And you'll find most of the nitrogen, phosphorus in the soil is actually stored in these organic matter, particularly on the humus. It is really important, and that, as I said before, is nutrient available. One of the things I like to use, I'm a great believer in soil tests. Most of them, some will have what's called the CEC, cation exchange capacity. The thing is, anions like nitrates and phosphorus and sulfur are equally important as cations, such as calcium, magnesium, and so on. Many of them don't use anion exchange because unless you've got organic matter, you've actually got nowhere to store anions in the soil, and they readily leach out. To me, more important is what I call TEC, total ion exchange. I want to see the storage capacity of both cations and anions and look at that. So when I get a soil test, I actually get that. And regard that as your soil, soil fuel tank. So the same way I showed you, I demonstrated how we can store more water in our soil by increasing our soil organic matter, our humus. It's the same with nutrients. If we've got a small amount, we can, it's like having a really small fuel tank in your car, You'll get from here to Albury, but if you wanted to go further, you're stuffed. On the other hand, if you've got a larger fuel tank, you can go a lot further without filling up. And why this is really important is in our cropping systems. One of the big paradoxes that we have in our current cropping system is this, is we pour on all the fertilizers in the beginning of the crop, just when the little seed's sprouting. Now, when a seed's sprouting about this much, how much fertilizer does it need towards when the crop is maturing, and particularly, say grains or whatever, it's setting, it's heading, it's setting seed. A fruit crop, same thing. The point where it sets seeds, that's when you need most of your nutrients, when you need most of the nitrogen to form proteins. But when we put it on as water soluble, we have the bulk of it there when the crop just can't use it. And then as the season goes, because all this is leachable, it just goes down, and we have the least amount when it needs the most. It's not, for me, it doesn't make a lot of sense. You will read it in agronomy text so that people start looking at, how can we have split applications, and how can we go and put on a whole lot just towards the end to finish the crop. Trouble is, in most cases, we can't get machinery through because our crop is too high, or if we put the machinery through at that stage, we actually start to damage our crop by running over with tractors and so on, or maybe put it on by helicopter, or now talk about maybe putting on with drones, or need pretty big drones to put on heaps of fertilizer, and it's a problem that hasn't been solved, but it shouldn't have been a problem. The idea is, what happens if you had a really big fuel tank and you actually use, and you've actually got a system where instead of leaching out, it holds onto it, which is held onto the humus, and the plants can pull it off as it needs it. So in the beginning of the system, when the seeds are really small, they can just pull off the little bits they need. Everything's there. But when you get to the stage where the crop is finishing, bang, we've got huge reserves, and they can pull all that off. That is what we're talking about with these systems. And that is also one of the reasons why we can, with these systems, get higher yields and get quality. And I think that's really important to talk about too, the quality by having those nutrients. The critical thing here is that we want to make sure we have the nutrients, and at the right level. That's a talk for another time to actually talk about nutrient balancing. I just want to get the basic concept across of why having humus and organic matter is so important for our nutrient management to get good yields of quality crops. So for all the scientists and people say it can't be done, you can't dramatically increase soil organic matter. Let's look at some of the systems. This is an aerated composting system worked out by David Johnson from New Mexico State University that really increases diversity of soil microorganisms. They've been getting, in a peer-reviewed paper, 18 metric tonnes of soil organic matter per hectare per year increase in soil organic matter. This is a really nice little one. They started off being a larger farm, but they actually went down to just 2 acres, less than a hectare. They actually make $100,000 US an acre. But they managed to increase, in just 6 years, increase their soil organic matter from 2.4 to between 7 and 8%. Remember, you heard one of the goals of the Regenerative group for National Regeneration Agriculture Day is to get things up to 8%. Well, these things are being done. Here's a case where it's done in 6 years. That's been verified by Chico State University in the USA. So this is good data. One of the ones where now we are getting very good data. I know there's a lot of people who right out there and rubbish it, but thanks now to Texas A&M and others in the United States who are doing peer-reviewed research, we're actually starting to understand the importance of proper regenerative or holistically managed grazing, cell grazing, and getting better data on it in terms of how it improves soil organic matter, water holding, stock carrying capacity. If you think about all the things I've talked about now in this week, we can increase the amount of soil organic matter in our grazing systems. That means we can hold far more water, we can have far more pasture, we can have more animals per hectare. This is just the results of a peer-reviewed study done by Arizona State University looking at 3 of these farms. Found on average they're building 13.8 metric tonnes of soil organic matter per hectare per year. So I just want to now just finish and just quickly refresh and just go through the basic principles again. The whole concept of what I started with. What are we doing with farmers? We are capturing solar energy through leaves, through photosynthesis. And using that to provide all these organic compounds that the roots of our plants put into the soil. We want to maximise every square inch, every square millimetre of our farm we want to be covered with leaf. We want to capture every photon that falls on our farm and turn that into glucose, which is the energy to feed our livestock, which is our soil microbiome. That is what we want to do. How do we do it so that we, how can you say, a lot of people say, well then you've got a farm full of weeds. You've got all these plants out competing your crop. So I just wanted to show you the basic theory again here of the idea of, 98% of a plant's biomass comes from capturing sunlight using carbon dioxide, which it gets from the air, and water from the soil, by making sure our crop gets the sunlight first and its roots get access to the water first. If we do that, we've got the system. Now, it might mean, and I haven't got the time to do it, but in some cases where we've got deficient soils, these other cover crops or intercrops can compete. The answer to that is not killing the intercrop, but fixing up the soil deficiency. So you actually have enough trace elements or whatever elements for both. I want to get that across. You don't fix up a soil deficiency by spraying out plants because they're competing. You fix up that deficiency by making sure that there's enough nutrients that cover crop is not taking nutrients away from our cash crop. We add, not subtract. And that's why soil tests are important, to understand if that's happening. So, getting back to that thing again, that we want our, the concept now, instead of weeds, our crop, let's talk about cash crop. That's the one that earns us money. Cover crop is the one that helps us build soil fertility and build, feed microbiomes and give us the ecosystem services, pest control, whatever you want to call it, that helps our cash crop. They're the two concepts, cash crop, cover crop. No longer do we have weeds. And it's about management. Management is everything. So one of my favourites I learnt last year, here in Victoria, it's a classic example, like Cole Seiss's pasture cropping. This is actually an improvement of it. Cole Seiss modified no-till gear to. If you're going through pasture, you've got a big root. You've got a hard root mass to go through to cut up, to plough in. And this system done by Neil's, his system where you just cut in and break the root mass but also lift it up, means now that you can then plough in the, in his case, he's doing a really nice salad crop, beef salad for his animals, a cover crop. You grow through it and complete diversity through the perennial pasture and graze on it. But this sort of system you could also use for cash crops, for modifying that to actually grow grains that you could harvest like coal-sice does. With this, I actually find this is actually an improved system of coal-sices. These are other systems, similar ones, developed in the USA, where using an idea, or in this case they're using annual rye, seeding it, growing it really tall. By growing it tall like that, you provide a lot of organic matter, imagine. Growing it tall like that is a really good way to suppress other weeds, other things that you don't want. Rolling it at the right time and making a nice mat, and then just drilling into that mat. And so in this case they're doing soybeans there, and getting these systems are actually getting significant increases in yield, and compared to the cost of ploughing up and fertilising, the actual production costs are a fraction. This is another version of it. For instance, growing something like vetch, the vetches that will grow over winter. They tend to die off as it warms up. My grandfather was the one who really put me onto vetches and taught me how to use them. Particularly, he used to love using them in his orchards, his grapes, and basically in winter to have a nice cover over the South Australia, have this nice cover over the orchard, and then in summer it got really dry, it'd die off and have this wonderful layer of mulch. But it suppressed all the weeds, got free nitrogen, increased soil organic matter. In this case, by rolling it, instead of waiting for it to die off, because you want to plant in early spring, in this system, you roll it just before it starts flowering, and then they drill it in corn. If you have the corn's coming up, you've got a nice mat of the vetch that mulches. You've got all the nitrogen you need for the corn. As the corn grows up, it shades and it keeps the weeds out. And these ended up being some of the highest yielding systems. Their yields, this is in bushels an acre in the US, 160 bushels an acre as against the conventional average of 130. But I think the one for me is really important these days as farmers is when we're trying to look at, one thing is getting a higher yield, which is really important. The other thing is lowering our production costs. If you look at the amount of diesel, you go from 231 litres of diesel per hectare in the conventional tillage to 77 litres. That's a huge saving in our diesel bill, and wear and tear on tractors and so on and so on and so on. And I'm putting these across. There's lots of things like this, and getting back to what I was saying right in the beginning, there's no one size fits all here. There's no right way to do it. These are all different techniques that are being used that you could look at and say, could I use these on my farm? Or if I modify it, how could I do this so I can increase production, keep my yields, but at the same time, lower my costs? Because at the end of the day too in farming, the years when we get bumpy yields, guess what? Everybody else has got a bumper yield. Yields go up. Which way do prices go? They go south. So we've got a bumpy yield, but we don't actually. Sometimes we don't actually. We make less money. It's the way markets work. The reality is, if we look at all our farming systems, this idea, yields have got so much better. You start looking at yields in the 70s and yields now, Not a lot of difference, but I'll tell you where there is a difference in the amount of inputs we buy now. The amount and the cost of them. So when we start looking at our percentage, at the end of the year we do our thing, work out what we've got in and how much we're paid out. If we can start looking at stopping how much we pay out, that means what we bring in, that net, is better. We can start earning more money. That's actually, in the end, what I did with my farm. And I ended up becoming a profitable farmer. It was a struggle, like all farming is. In the end, I'm really proud I raised my children, family as a farmer. You know, that to me is probably my greatest achievement in life. So I just want to end. This is my last bit now. I just want to end on probably one of the greatest costs: organic nitrogen. Synthetic nitrogen. Nitrogen out of a bag. That has gone through the roof compared to the amount that my grandfather used, my family used. And I look back and just see how much nitrogen is used now in farming, and yet we're not getting the yields to justify it. But everybody says, if I don't use that, I'll lose yield. So firstly, I've been in these sort of situations where I've been with people from SARA and other people, and they'll show their data showing that it's impossible to increase soil organic matter. Even last year I was in one in South Africa where they were proposing that they should get carbon credits for reducing, because their new method slowed down the rate of loss of soil carbon. But most conventional systems, you lose soil carbon. At best, they'll argue you can't increase it, you can just slow down the rate. They'll argue that it's important, without nitrogen, you cannot get enough plant growth to grow soil carbon. But they've got the cart before the horse. Let's start looking at the science. So very good science came out of the University of Illinois near Chicago. And this is at what they call the Morrow plots, the second oldest agricultural plots. The oldest, Ross Hampstead, started in the 1840s. And this then started about 20 years later when researchers went over to the UK, saw that and said, oh yeah, we should do something similar. So they can go back to plots that they have there. They've never received synthetic nitrogen. And so they started looking at soil organic matter levels and comparing them. And what they found is that where synthetic nitrogen fertilizers are used is equivalent of the soil lost 10,000 kilograms of soil carbon per hectare per year, on top of all the crop residues just turning to carbon dioxide. That's actually equivalent to 36,000 kilograms of carbon dioxide per hectare per year. They actually found the greater the amounts of nitrogen used, the greater the loss of soil carbon. One of the really important things I want to get across when I show you systems that are getting high amounts of increases in soil carbon is that they have cut back, in many cases, totally have ended the use of synthetic nitrogen fertilizers. They've increased productivity and also increased their bank balances. So how do we do it? So first I want to say, remember I said before, the air is 78% nitrogen in the soil. Soil organic matter has what we call a carbon to nitrogen ratio. It's averages between 12 to 1 to 9 per 1. There are all differences. And without getting too much into the maths here and confusing people with maths, I'd just rather take you straight to this table, and this is where I've used 10 to 1 to get it across. So if we've got 1% soil organic carbon, that means we have 2,400 kilograms of organic nitrogen. 1% soil organic carbon is 1.78% soil organic matter. we get up to around the 8% soil organic matter, or 6, you've got 12,000 kilograms of carbon. Just say, we're talking about 4% soil organic matter. We've got 4.5, almost 5 tonnes of organic nitrogen per hectare. Now, if we've got 5 tonnes of soil organic nitrogen per hectare, why are we buying it? Wouldn't the question be asked, we've got them there, what is not happening in my management system that I have to turn out and buy bags of nitrogen when I've got all this in the soil? What am I not doing right? That's what should have been asked, not, oh, you better go and buy some more. What am I not doing right? And so I want to just start firstly. You will hear, and I get challenged all the time in these things, it doesn't matter if that soil is, if that nitrogen is in organic form, plants can only use it as nitrate or ammonium. They can't use it in any other form. Well, I beg to differ. Yes, in the 1840s when that research was done, that was really good research. Groundbreaking stuff in the 1840s. Unfortunately for some of the agronomists, they haven't really sort of realised that since the 1840s, a bit more scientific research has been done. We've come a little way since the 1840s, like we don't have to use steam anymore. We've got things like electricity, you've got cars, But the basis of their soil fertilisation is still grounded in that. They're not looking, let's get back to what I'm talking about now, is biology and the biological science. Let's start looking at natural systems, and biological systems, and how does nitrogen get used? When I go into the mountain ash forests here in Victoria, I haven't seen anybody running out with bags of nitrogen to grow the world's tallest hardwood trees. How does that happen? If they can't use, if no one's giving them nitrate or ammonium. When we look at natural systems, the bulk of nitrogen that plants take up is not as nitrate, is not as ammonium, but is in organic form. And we have hundreds and hundreds of papers showing this. So yes, plants do take it up, but no, we are doing something. We're not managing our system right. We have this nitrogen, but our system isn't using it. One of the reasons why is that when you apply synthetic nitrogen, you actually stop these natural nitrogen systems. They one of the reasons why it all gets turned to carbon dioxide, you stimulate a whole lot of microbes that just eat your carbon and turn it into carbon dioxide. But it's, well, look, anybody knows if you're growing legumes, do you add nitrogen? What happens if you want to get a lot of nitrogen when you're growing legumes? What happens if you add nitrogen fertilizer? They stop producing it. The natural rhizobium stop working, the biology. It's the same in the soil. We have a whole lot of natural nitrogen fixers. We're learning more and more about them. We have thousands of different species in the soil. When we add this, we stop that process. So, firstly, I just want to show you a picture here. This is Dr. Christine Jones, took this in Alberta. It's a drought, and I've grown wheat there. One is the standard monoculture. That crop, you wouldn't even be able to put cattle on it to eat. The other one is a polyculture with a whole lot of legumes and others in it. You can see the wheat is heading. Okay, you wouldn't put a header through that, but at least you got to get stock feed and stuff. But you can see the difference between the two, where by getting the biology right, it's a seriously bad year, but one, you'll at least make money off, but with the right management. And I want to get this across, that this idea that anything that is not our crop competes with water, competes with for nutrients, is not right. Technically, the standard monoculture should be doing the best if we were to believe the agronomy text, and the other one should be the failure. It's the other way around, because you've got, once again, let's get back to the basic principle. You've got a lot of leaf area, photosynthesizing, putting a lot of nutrients and feeding the soil biology. And so that one is healthy. So let's look at taking this and putting it into our systems. So a really common one, for instance, something like winter-growing legumes like vetches or lupins we can put through our grapes in our orchards. Get free nitrogen, organic matter. This is where we can grow things like legumes as cover crops through our something like a maize crop, wheat crops. This, I haven't got time to go into, but this dramatically increases yields where it's used in Africa. This is work we did with sugarcane, where we actually, in this case, it's soybeans put through there in the intercrop, and we actually increased the amount of sugar. This is something we did that because we learnt that they're doing it in Egypt and Thailand. There they actually harvest the beans as well. They use mung beans, soybeans, they get a second crop, and they increase the yield of sugar as well as their second crop. In our case, we just wanted it for nitrogen and soil organic matter and for weed suppression. This is an example of using chilies, and in there they're growing desmodium, which is a prostrate legume, and lucerne alfalfa as another one. Both of these actually, as well as providing nitrogen, also work as insectary plants. One repels pests, the other one attracts the beneficials, so you increase the yields. But I want to give you this as an example again, that by adding these in, we're increasing production, not decreasing. And so, lastly, I just want to end on this. We have heaps of science showing that by getting the right system, we can use free-living bacteria to give us our nitrogen for free. If we increase our soil organic matter, we are increasing, by definition, our nitrogen. Really important. And the last slide I just want to end on, this is really exciting now, endophytic nitrogen. We're learning we've got more and more of these. Well, these are a bit like rhizobium. We all know about rhizobium in legumes, the microbes that form nodules in the roots and fix it. We now know that there's a whole range of them that will live in the roots of every crop that will do the same thing, that will fix nitrogen. Now, some of these are actually now available and being commercialised for plants like rice and sugarcane in India and other countries. I know of no work done in Australia, although a commercialised work, although there's been a little bit of research. But in the end, basically what I'm trying to show you is where we are going now by starting to understand the science, how we can start to now apply it to improve our productivity. In the meantime, until some of these improved products come on the market and things, it's the best thing to do is just I call it the shotgun approach. We just want to increase the amount of, I'll go back to the same thing I started again, photosynthesis, to collect every photon we can get, turn it into glucose, into energy to feed the soil microbiome. And we want to do things too, like for some of our systems, to get, because we've run them down for so long, we want to start looking at ways of actually jump-starting the soil microbiome by putting in really good compost, things like vermicompost, we know works so well to actually start getting these species in, because actually what we'll find is all these things, the beneficial fungi, endophytic nitrogen fixers, free-living nitrogen fixers, they are all in good composts. So by just rethinking and building up the system, so what we're doing is feeding it with carbon-based products and feeding that soil microbiome, we'll find that we'll get multiple benefits, that we can reduce our costs, increase our resilience, and increase our yields, and really importantly, increase our viability so that there is a future for farming. Thank you.